Hello class, Professor Tangway here. Today I want to talk to you about the narrative essay. I want to talk to you about learning styles as well as your discussion board posts. Okay, first of all, the narrative. What is a narrative? A narrative is quite simply a story. That's all it is. We all tell narratives regularly. But what makes a narrative essay different than a story that you may tell a friend at any given time? The real point of the narrative essay is that it's a story, it's told from your point of view, but it has a point, and that point is called your thesis. Your thesis is really the underlying message behind why you are telling this particular story. Think about all the times you've had someone tell you a story and they go on and on and on and on and on, and there's no point. They finish their story and you're sort of left there thinking, okay, great. That's 10 minutes of my life I'm never going to get back. What was the point of all of that? Well, you know what? That can happen in writing as well. So when we're telling a narrative through writing, we need to make sure that we have a point to our story, really our thesis. Now, the thesis of our narrative can be anything from I'm telling you the story because it was the most profound moment in my life and it changed who I am as a person, all the way to I'm telling you the story because it's one of the funniest things I have ever witnessed, and it would be a darn shame for me to not share it with you. So, a narrative essay just needs to have a point, but you need to know what the point of your essay is because knowing that will help you to determine what information you need to include and what information you need to exclude. Now, on the same note, what information do we include? Well, we want to make sure that our narratives are told in a precise time period. We do not want to cover a very large segment of time. Really, you want to probably keep your story down to maybe a day, probably only in about an hour, a moment. You don't want to tell about an entire experience. For example, let's say I were to tell you a story about wanting to, or being afraid of going on roller coasters. Having been afraid of going on roller coasters for my entire life, I was scared to death to go on a roller coaster. The whole concept of being strapped into this machine and hurtled around a track at 70 miles an hour with nothing but a seatbelt between me and near death absolutely terrified me. And so finally, one day, my family decides to go down to Walt Disney World, and my brother convinces me that I need to ride the Rock and Roller Coaster, which I do. And in the end, I discover I love roller coasters. Okay, so I could tell you that entire story. The thesis of that might be, if I decide to, my thesis might be, I should not let my fears dictate what I do and do not do in life. I need to try things and decide if they are right for me. Let's say that's my thesis. Okay, so if that is my thesis, then I just need to tell you the parts of the story that indicate to you that I'm afraid of them. I finally took the plunge and experienced it, and that I got to the end and realized I had been missing out on this amazing thing for my entire life because I let fear get in the way. So, do I want to tell you about planning the trip to Disney World? No. Do I want to tell you about getting on the airplane and flying down there and checking into the hotel and all of us arriving in the park for the first time? No. Do I want to tell you about the other 10 rides that I went on before I finally got up the courage to go onto the roller coaster? No. You know what I probably want to do? I probably want to start with the story right as I'm sitting in the seat of that rock and roller coaster and they are strapping me in and I can barely breathe. Maybe I start telling you this story from what's going on inside my head, how I have this immense fear going on and all the thoughts that are going through my head. And I want to describe the sound of that holster coming down, click, 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 doom, locking me into place, and how it locked into place and my heart stopped beating. Maybe I want to start from that point, and then I want to take you through the experience of the roller coaster ride itself. Or maybe my description of the roller coaster ride itself is going to be very brief. Maybe I want to elaborate more on the back end after we stop and I finally feel like I can breathe again, and then how it's actually given new life and new invigoration to me, and how I'm thankful to my brother for this for the rest of my life. I don't know. But I want to only tell you the parts of the story that go to the thesis, not to the entire experience. It will make it more enjoyable for the reader, and really it makes it more enjoyable for me as the writer. Okay, so we have a thesis, we have a narrowed focus of time, and then you also want to consider the order. What order will you tell your story in? Most likely you're going to tell it in chronological order. You're going to start whatever point you start from, and then you're going to move forward in time. That doesn't mean that you can't utilize the tool of flashback, which means that, so maybe I'm telling you the story, I start from when I'm actually sitting down into the roller coaster car, and I'm locked into it, and then maybe I flash back to a time that was earlier in my life when I had this overwhelming fear and how I did not get onto the roller coaster because of that, and then I come right back into the present. That's fine. You can use flashback. That's a very effective tool. But other than the flashback, everything is really told in chronological order. I don't tell you about getting into the chair and then getting off of the roller coaster and then go back to the ride and then wandering around the park before I got on the roller coaster. It would be too disjointed for the reader. So really you want to tell it in chronological order. Okay, so as far as the narrative goes, that's about all that I really want to cover. So just remember, your narrative will be a personal story. Yes, it needs to be personal. It needs to be about you. It will have a focus, which is your thesis, the why. Why are you telling me this story? And it's not just because your teacher has assigned you a narrative essay. Why this story? Keep that in mind. And then it needs to be told in that concise chronological order as well. Okay, moving on. Learning styles. Learning styles are very, very important. Now, we have the narrative that we are going to start writing, and you need to come up with a topic for your narrative essay. And knowing how to brainstorm a topic can actually be one of the more difficult things, but if you know what your learning style is, it can actually help you in determining how you will brainstorm in coming up with your topic. Okay, so learning styles. There is the visual. You are either a visual learner, an auditory learner, or a kinesthetic/hands-on learner. Most people are dominant in one of those three areas. Some people have a bit of an overlap between two. There are some people that are very strong auditory and hands-on learners, and there are different variations. Most people are stronger in one of the three areas. So you would want to figure out which learning style best suits you, which one that you are stronger in, so that you can utilize some of the tools. So if you are a visual learner, basically that means you learn best by seeing information. That might mean reading something, seeing a picture of something. Usually it's something like that. You see it, so that's how you best remember something. If you're auditory, it means you retain your information, process the information best by hearing it. And if you're hands-on, it means that you learn best by actually doing something physical. Which will help you to retain the information. So basically, a very quick way of determining which type of learner you are, it can be to imagine a time when you are taking a test and you are struggling to remember information that you've studied this. This is information that you've studied, but you're just struggling to recall that information. And then in the end, you ended up being successful in recalling that information. Okay, what did help you to remember that information? If you're a visual learner, as you're taking that test, you can almost see where that information was in your notes or in the textbook, or even written up on the board if you were in a classroom. You can actually, you maybe can't see the information exact, like you don't have a photographic memory, but you can almost visualize it. You kind of close your eyes and you can see that it was in the textbook, it was on the right-hand page, it was in the second column about halfway down. You sort of can visualize the information. And as you're doing that, you can sort of kind of recall other things, and then poof, all of a sudden the information shows up in your brain. That works really, that's really the visual learner. The auditory learner, they will likely remember what was said to them. They will hear the teacher lecturing. They will maybe hear somebody else saying it, or they might even remember other sounds that were happening while they were learning it. So maybe sometimes music can help an auditory learner process information better. They're listening, and they associate the song to the lessons, so that can help them as well. And then you have the hands-on learner. The hands-on learner generally learns best by physically doing. In a traditional classroom setting, that can be difficult, although sometimes it can be as simple as having something like flashcards or different written tools where you can actually manipulate things and move them around. That physical act of moving the pieces of paper can actually help the hands-on learner. But probably one of the more effective tools for a hands-on learner for remembering is actually writing, taking notes. That physical action of writing something helps that hands-on learner to process information. And then another great trick for the hands-on learners is to just have something, a pen, or I don't know where my pen, oh, here's my pen, sorry. Have a pen or some other thing that they can manipulate while they're learning. The physical act of moving something, clicking it, squeezing it, whatever, that can help. I've actually seen students with like a ball, and they'll just sit there and they will throw the ball against the wall as they're learning, and they're doing that physical thing, and the act of doing that while they're studying the other information will combine the two things and will actually help them to learn a little bit better. So what does all of that have to do with brainstorming? Okay, so as far as brainstorming goes, there are different ideas, page 22 to 27 in your textbook for brainstorming. Look those over, and once you've identified what your primary learning style is, some of those may work better for than others. So for example, there is the idea of like dialoguing with someone else, kind of like bouncing ideas back and forth, a word association type of a game. If you're an auditory learner, that's a great brainstorming idea. That might work really well. But no matter which learning style you have, I would recommend trying a lot of these different brainstorming activities, because they can help you to really process the information and come up with the best possible idea. But as far as brainstorming goes, there also are some sentence starters at the bottom of this week's folder in the weekly lessons. It says narrative sentence starters. They really are just some ideas to kind of get you going. It's obviously not the full idea, but it could sort of give you an idea of where to go. So for example, one of the sentence starters is yesterday I, and then ... You just finish that sentence. Yesterday I went to my grandmother's 84th birthday. And that in and of itself is not a story, because if I just told you the story of the birthday party, like, woohoo, it's an 84th birthday party, not very exciting, right? Okay, but what if as I'm thinking about going to the party, I start thinking about my grandmother telling me the story of sitting out on the front steps with her brother, and he shared part of his chocolate bar, but this was during the Great Depression, when getting a chocolate bar was actually like a really big deal, and it was not easy to come by. And so she's telling me these stories, and maybe I've heard the story 500 times. Okay, but now what if my thesis is how learning lessons from the elders in our life is one of the most valuable things that we can do? Maybe instead of tuning them out because we've heard the story 100 times, maybe we recognize the value in our limited time with our elders and how we need to seize those moments while we can. Maybe that's my thesis. So again, I get the idea from the sentence starter, which then takes me down a road to building an idea. Okay, so that's another idea. And then finally, on page 181, there are some ideas that you can use as well. So they may or may not work for you. Try them, and good luck.